Scotia.
Your Honour. Colleagues, listening to the debate on Motion 165, I've come away really puzzled by some of the claims that have been made about these proposed changes to the Senate rules. Let me focus on three questions that have arisen for me. First, is it reasonable to claim that these rule changes are being rammed and jammed through the Senate when changes have been discussed for almost 9 years? I'll quote Deputy Chair of Rules, Senator Batters, and I quote, "These rule changes, previously tried and failed to be forced through before, now 18 months later, the Trudeau government is bringing this draconian omnibus motion to this chamber," end quote. Now, we are the chamber of sober second thought. As a result, things commonly move very slowly around here, but discussion and debate surrounding these rule changes has been going on for almost 9 years. I have to believe that we finally reached the point where we can stop second sober thoughting and finally make a decision. As Yogi Berra might advise, we've been sitting at the fork in the road. Let's start to take it. I was a member of the Independent Senators Group when I was asked to join the Rules Committee. I only lasted one meeting. I truly commend my colleagues who sit on that committee. In that 2-hour meeting, debate focused on whether the clerk should read out every single item on our order paper at every single Senate sitting. Those in favour of this change noted that the scroll meeting occurs just a few hours before the sitting each day. And if no speaker is identified for 90%, and no speaker tends to be identified for 90% of the items, so why read every item? Now, for the handful of people who might be watching this at home, our scroll is simply our agenda. So to be clear, every time we meet in the chamber, every item of business is considered for debate whether or not a senator intends to speak. Let's contemplate the results of this supposedly radical change. If every item on our order paper is not read at every sitting, a senator who wants to speak on an item not on the scroll would only have to stand once debate on the previous item is concluded and ask the speaker to rise on debate on the item of their choice. Yet changing this outdated tradition was deemed to be highly inappropriate and possibly contrary to our parliamentary privilege. As a result, this productivity-diminishing practice will remain even when the proposed rule changes are implemented. So, honourable colleagues, we will continue to hear, reliably, stand, 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 repeated countless times at every sitting, just so things don't move too swiftly around here. So to get back to my point, no, I don't think that these changes are being rammed and jammed through the Senate. Changes that reflect the new reality of the Senate have been discussed for almost 9 years. Second, are these long-proposed Senate-created rule changes being thrust on us by Prime Minister Trudeau? I'll quote Senator Plett from last week. Quote, "Justin Trudeau wants these changes, and what Justin Trudeau wants is senators have to deliver," unquote. Senator Plett's claim runs contrary to the fact that the work that led to the ultimate development of these proposed rule changes began in late 2015 with the formation of the Special Senate Committee on Senate Modernization, as we were reminded earlier. That committee was dominated by a majority of members appointed by a Conservative Prime Minister, Stephen Harper. These included Senator Green as chair of the committee, Senators Brazeau, From, McGuinness, Malte, Locklear, Stewart-Olson, Verner, and Wells. The committee's final report was enthusiastically tabled by Senator Green on April 10, 2019. I don't know how many of you remember being there, but he did a great job more than 4 years ago. The job of modernizing the Senate rules was then handed to the Rules Committee 4 years ago. The suggestion that Prime Minister Trudeau has thrust these rule changes upon the Senate when the intention to modernize the rules of the Senate first originated in a Conservative-dominated Senate, with work being completed by a Conservative-dominated committee, is, well, cockamamie. Therefore, in addition to the work of the Conservative-opposed dominated Modernization Committee, the facts before us regarding the proposed rule changes are they have been discussed in the Standing Senate Committee on Rules for over 5 years, were twice before tabled in the Senate, first by a senator appointed by Prime Minister Trudeau, next by a senator appointed by Prime Minister Harper, and are now supported by the government representative. Third, and my final puzzling question, is why are these proposed changes being fought so vigorously by the Conservative caucus? As Senator Plett clarified and corrected last week, the Conservatives are currently 21 points ahead of the Liberals in the polls. 22, I'm sorry, I'm behind the times. It's hard to keep up. Those same polls suggest that the Prime Minister is out of favour with the vast majority of Canadians. So it certainly appears that Senator Plett may be entirely justified in believing that the Conservatives will form the next government. At the same time, it's also claimed that these rule changes dilute the opposition's powers to do their rightful job of simply delaying the implementation of government legislation. Yet the ability to be oppositional in the Senate remains unchanged, as evidenced last Thursday. There were 6 motions to adjourn the Senate, each with an hour bell. The first motion to adjourn was before 4 p.m. and the last at 11:57, 3 minutes before the Senate must adjourn. The result being the Senate actually adjourned after 1. In addition, there was a 2-hour dinner break, so there was 8 hours of oppositional protest last Thursday. It was a Senate version of a sit-in. Now, I have a dominant Scottish gene, as I've mentioned before, and I hate waste, and I think Senator Plett speaks to that concern about waste quite often as well. So the waste of 8 hours in Senate time is frustrating, especially when we have important, long-awaited private members' bills that need our attention, like C-280 for fruit and vegetable farmers and 244, the right to repair, among others. Considering all the effort that has been invested to try and convince us that these rule changes are going to somehow hamper the opposition when we see a Conservative government about potentially to be elected, I think perhaps people are protesting too much. Perhaps these rule changes will weaken the opposition's power, but given where the Conservatives sits in the polls, these changes will soon be to their benefit, as Senator Housakos was pointing out quite eloquently. But Senator Plett, you may have made a bit of a strategic error over the last couple of years, because you forced our attendance at many memorable and highly extended training sessions and delay tactics. So I think some have been paying attention. Job well done. As I wrap up, I know that it's often claimed that Trudeau-appointed senators receive calls from the Prime Minister. I have to admit that I, like others here, have also received a phone call from the Prime Minister. But it only happened once in June 2018, and it was a highly memorable call because he called me to offer me a Senate appointment. During that call, he made one very clear and specific request, and that was that I challenge the government, quote unquote. I tried to do so respectfully and collegially, and now others may have received another request or other phone calls, but I have not. I see my role not simply as opposing or delaying government legislation and motions, but working on finding ways to improve them. I believe that the Senate should act independently, but not be antagonistic to legislation proposed by a duly elected government. Our job is to fully engage in hearing the concerns that may not have been previously considered, and where appropriate, proposing amendments intended to improve government legislation. Senator Tanis previously commented that our role in the Senate is not simply to be an off-Broadway version of the House of Commons. Colleagues, that captures my vision of the Senate. Colleagues, my hope is that these rule changes will help to maintain a degree of independence of the Senate, and as such, I look forward to finally voting in favour of these rule changes that we've discussed for many years. Thank you, colleagues.